Hi, my name is Chris Tucci and I'm at Imperial College Business School at Imperial College London. And I wanted to talk today about a little research project that I've done on crowdsourcing with my colleagues Adriano Solidoro, Francesco Aleotti, Davide Diamantini, and Gianluigi Viscusi. The title of the talk is Governance and Organizing Factors Affecting Crowdsourcing Performance, a case study in policy contests. So just to motivate this a little bit, we know that innovation contests have been growing in popularity. And of course, they've been found to be very useful for knowledge sharing, for innovation, et cetera, by exploiting or taking advantage of crowds. So what we wanted to talk about in this particular paper is what are some of the considerations to best design a contest in terms of the mechanisms to motivate, engage, and retain crowds. So that's the kind of thing that we were exploring in this paper. Such mechanisms as, how much knowledge do you want to give the participants in advance? How much introductory knowledge do you want to give them? Do you want to reveal the identity or status of different sponsors? Do you want to use staff members as facilitators, and how much should they be intervening in the early stages? And also, how much do you want to gamify your contest, assigning scores and prizes, etc. So this is the kinds of things we were exploring. Just to get some terminology out of the way here, open innovation obviously is widely used and studied. We wanted to look a little bit, move away from the firm-centric perspective here to more like a community perspective. So knowledge collaboration in communities, crowdsourcing, not only for innovation problems inside firms, but also for policy making and public policy deliberative processes. We're also going to talk about crowd dynamics. So, how the different configurations of crowds, communities, and groups that might emerge from different activities, try and understand how those crowd dynamics operate. And finally, we'll also think a little bit about crowd capital, which here we're defining as the total number of crowd units having a demonstrated effectiveness in idea generation or achievement of tasks. So that's a little bit of background information. This is an exploratory case study. So, we're trying to develop some theory and we're using theoretical sampling. We've been using an abductive technique. So we're going back and forth to the data and look at an empirical exploration here. And we're coupling that with kind of an ethno-methodological perspective. So basically we're trying to triangulate between data, methods, theory, et cetera. So the goal here is to understand whether and how a social order is produced in a crowdsourcing contest and how the different actors account for it. So just to give you some background on the context here, this is a crowdsourcing experience that was held in the second half of 2019, and it was designed for a large community of professional trainers. Now, there are different categories or challenges. There were 5, let's just call them grand challenges, that were the macro themes that these trainers could participate in. So one was called culture, social capital, and territory. Second one was digital transformation, social innovation and the new economy, young people, intergenerational relationships and multiculturalism, and the institutional value chain and lifelong training. So the goals here were the drafting of a wiki report, so a community-based report, and guidelines for policy making. There are different roles here. One of them was the facilitator. So some of the staff members were contributing actively on the platform, trying to stimulate discussion, especially in the early stages. And there were the members of the crowd. And why were these crowd members showing up on this site and taking part in this contest is because this was a way for them to achieve some kind of professional qualification. And in addition to the professional qualification, think of continuing education, things like that. It gave them some kind of unusual professional experience. So it gave them a chance to try something new in terms of an online platform. Each challenge was open for 5 weeks. And at the end of the 5th week, then there were no more comments or likes or posting new ideas allowed. This is just a little picture of the number of contributions. that were made. You know, there were about 281 users, and there were 20 facilitators during this 5-month period. And they produced about 1,700 contributions. And as you can see here, there are different spikes in the contributions, especially by the users that were seated. So there were certain times during the contest where the users came together and gave lots of contributions, made idea postings, and also reacted to the ideas that were posted by other people. If we think about the level of contribution of these users, we're getting a little bit more down into the data now. So, you know, only about 23% of them were completely inactive. They basically made no contribution, they had no votes, nothing. And from there on, it was passive, one-time contributors. But, you know, the majority of these guys, or I would say that the highest percentage was actually what we would call repeat contributors. So they made actually from 3 to 10 contributions during the course of the contests. And then finally, there was a good chunk, 13% or so, who are very active contributors, making even in excess of 11 contributions. Now, we also scored their engagement as part of this analysis. So, you know, some of them made comments, they did likes, they proposed ideas, so they were actively, heavily engaged. And as you can see, about half of the users here were top engaged, or what we're calling soft engaged. So they were actually on there making ideas and comments. And then there was also a big chunk of people who we're calling opportunists here. They didn't propose anything, but they did a lot of likes, and so they got some, you know, there's a certain number of points that they needed to get. And then finally, only about a quarter of them were completely not engaged, or very, very little engaged. We think about the pertinence of the contributions. We also scored these things, and so we were looking at, just to show you that most of the contributions were implicitly addressing the challenge, they're referring to the challenge, and only 10% or so were addressing directly the challenge. But still, it's interesting to see, you know, how relevant the comments and ideas were. And in terms of the actual relevance, a good solid 37% were completely out of scope, or they were applicable to something else. However, you know, half of the ones were applicable and generalizable, and then another 16% were also centered with, you know, high relevance and very good depth. Usefulness, we scored the usefulness of the various contributions, and as you can see, most of them had some usefulness, and about a quarter of them were considered to be quite useful or very, very useful. Now, just to get to a quick discussion here in the short time that we have, what we've done is we've related this to uncertainty reduction theory, which refers to people, you know, meeting for the first time, things like this. People seek to resolve uncertainty and try and establish norms, legitimacy, status, etc. And so what we're trying to do here is, we're in the middle of it, and we don't have time to talk about it today, but we're trying to look at this through the lens of uncertainty reduction theory, and show how these dynamics were shaped throughout this process, and how that relates to uncertainty reduction, and how they attempt to impose some kind of social order as they take part in these contests. So if I could summarize what we've done here, we've studied 3 factors that influence the decision of participants to become involved, and to what extent in a contest. We looked at their levels of contribution, their behavior, the quality of their contributions. And we also can see that these contest managers can influence participants' decisions to engage more deeply. And that depends on a lot of the things that I mentioned at the very beginning. So, you know, how much introductory knowledge do you give them? How much do they understand the challenge early on? What is the identity and status of different sponsors? How much should the facilitators be involved in the early stage to seed the discussion, which is a very practical, actually a very practical aspect of this study. And finally, the degree of gamification, scores, prizes, etc. So we feel this article has potential to contribute to different things. So one is to arrive at a finer grained distinction between communities, crowds, and groups as crowdsourcing exercises progress, understanding whether and how a social order is produced in a crowdsourcing exercise, and is a complement to management literature that aims to identify factors of individual or team performance in crowdsourcing. So further research could be done on investigations at a more refined understanding of the opportunism dynamics. Those are the ones who just did likes and who didn't really generate new ideas or make any comments. And we think that could be a very interesting thing to follow up on in the next phase of this research. So let me thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to receiving any comments or feedback that you might have. Thanks again.